Hi, my name is Bill Garr, and I'm the CEO of Lowell House Addiction Treatment and Recovery. And as many of you out there know, we've been in the community for 47 years, going on 48 years. So we've been around for a while, helping Lowell deal with some of the addiction and treatment issues and the recovery issues in the community. And we've been a busy agency lately, so this is Recovery Matters. And Recovery Matters has explored through the 7 series we've been on, through the 7 chapters we've had. We've explored some fascinating topics, but one of the ones I've always wanted to do is about the power of media and what media and how that relates to the stigma people have and to the shame some people feel about their addiction, how it prevents sometimes some people getting help, but also on the other end, how it can inspire people, can help people. So we have some special guests today. Next to me is Jay Dolan Barry. Jay is a friend for several years. He's done several films for us. He is an independent filmmaker, and he has also been a producer for Channel 7, so he certainly knows TV media, and he's a great guy and has a lot to say about the media. And to his right is Todd Feathers. And Todd Feathers is our favorite reporter. Sorry, Rick Sobey. Todd Feathers is our favorite reporter at the Lowell Sun, and they're all great. Rick, you're terrific. But Todd has done some wonderful pieces for us, and always fair, and always presents, I think, the facts, which is very important to us. And to his right is Danielle McFadden, and mostly everyone out there knows Danielle. Danielle is the president of the Greater Lowell Chamber of Commerce. She does a wonderful job. I get my daily message from Danielle. So what I wanted to maybe address first is talk a little bit, and Danielle's going to really talk more about social media because she does it so well, and she's been a consultant in social media, Todd about the print media, and Jay is going to really talk about more film and the power of film. So let's start by saying, for each of your mediums that you do, and they're wonderful mediums, sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't, what's the power of your medium? How do you reach people, and why is your medium so special to people?
So I'm going to start?
Sure.
I mean, with social media, it's really, instead of word of mouth, it's world of mouth. The power of sharing a story and then seeing people commenting on it and sharing it is amazing. Since I've been at the Chamber, I've seen the addiction crisis go from not being talked about or not being talked about much to every day you see something across social media on it. Even families now that are talking about their loved ones, whether they are in recovery or unfortunately have passed. I've seen families that are using it now as a form of like mourning their loved ones, even posting on the page of somebody who has passed and telling their story. And I'm sure you're seeing that in print in obituaries now. People are talking about their loved one in addiction and how they can get help. So it's just amazing how it's kind of transformed throughout the years.
And amazing things. I can go back and in 5 minutes I can put on our Facebook page or I can tweet out that Danielle had amazing things to say on our show today.
Okay.
And it gets right out to people.
It does, yeah.
And sometimes that's a problem though, isn't it?
It can be, because you can't really control what other people are going to say about you or your organization. So it's good to have a handle on it.
Yeah,
and it's good to have somebody that's well versed.
You get impulsive, you can,
not
naming names, but you can get impulsive and do that too. So Todd, what about print media?
So I like to think that one of the things that print media can bring to the table is that there's still a sense of authority there. You know, there's still papers of record, and it's kind of a double-edged sword because if you write an article about recovery and how recovery is possible, and people see it in the newspaper, they can think, all right, this is real. It's not just something I'm reading online. But at the same time, if you write articles about how everybody who has ever used heroin, robs stores and is a danger, it can really harm the community. So it's that kind of permanence that you want to leverage in a positive way.
Yeah, just a question about the demographics for print media. I know that younger people, some of the millennials, tend to use online services, and Apple News and that kind of stuff. Are you reaching an older audience, and are they the audience that really takes that very much to heart, what people say in the print media?
The print audience definitely skews older, but for our newspaper, we have a website, we have a pretty great online presence, and we get readers of all ages on there. But it does skew older than other mediums.
Right.
I think there's such a community pride, though, in the Greater Lowell area
Yeah,
that
yes, it
people
is.
want to read the Sun because they want to know what's happening. And any time that your friend or an organization that you care about is featured, you're going to share that on social media.
Well, and sometimes I'll go buy a Globe or the Sun because I don't want them to go away.
Yeah.
Because we still love the print media.
Absolutely.
So, Jay, on the film media, TV.
Well, with video, it's extremely personal medium in the sense that it's you and the camera's eye. So with video, what tends to be most effective is personal story.
Right.
Someone who is willing to share, in the case of opioids, their struggle, their failures and their successes and how they got there. So hearing their story makes a connection with the viewer because it allows the viewer to find something in their story that says, oh, that's me, or that could be me. The difficulty with video is that you need someone to come on camera to say that. And getting to the stigma, we've found that that's sometimes the toughest thing. You may find a great story. Print could make Jay be Al and tell Jay's story through Al and not identify. With video, you have to really, your face is there.
You can't be anonymous.
No, and
Although they sometimes put that little thing in front.
and when they do that, when they silhouette the shot and so you can't identify someone, it gives it kind of a, can I really trust this person?
Right.
So they really have to be out there. So the stigma in terms of videos has been the toughest part sometimes. But you would agree it's getting better. More and more people are telling their story. There's kind of like when you tell your story and you're out there, it's almost like a refreshing thing. Okay, now you know what I've gone through. Now you've seen that I've recovered and I'm working to make a new life. You get feedback like, good for you. And so it's not the stigma. I think you can address this better than I can, but it seems like the stigma is less. It's still there, but as more and more people come forward and identify themselves, it gets easier.
Well, the state did a wonderful series on stigma, and it was, again, film. And print media too also. But I think those kinds of things, you're absolutely right, Jay, that really help people say, well, I saw Joe on that film and he's pretty proud of his recovery and not embarrassed about it, so maybe it's okay. And I think attitudes have changed, and I think that's thanks to some good jobs of the media in terms of portraying people with addiction disorders as people that are just our brothers, our sisters, our family members that have a disease. So it's been difficult. But then we get the kind of media that tantalizes. And you've got to sell papers, you've got to sell film, you want people on social media to do advertising. So how do you balance it out between tantalizing? And I'm thinking, even though it wasn't meant to tantalize, it does fascinate the new Time magazine series on the opioid crisis in America. Have you seen that? An amazing piece of photojournalism, a whole year of a photojournalist's life. So what do you think, Todd? How do you balance out the tantalizing versus the facts?
So I think it's really interesting and it's different when you're talking about addiction and the opioid epidemic in particular compared to other stories that we might cover in the media because, on its face there's so much tantalizing there, but you really, if you're doing it well, you don't need to be tantalizing because so many people are touched by this that people want to read things that they care about, that they have personal involvement with. Right. Everybody knows somebody or knows somebody who knows somebody who's been touched by addiction, and so you don't have to sensationalize some of these things. I mean, we do too often in the media. We certainly do, but people are really looking for information on this subject, and they don't need to be convinced to find it.
Right. But then you read some of the Facebook posts and you see people blame people with addiction for robbery and break-ins. And there's still this piece that the internet, and especially Facebook, would never lie to us, right? So what do we do about that,
Well,
Danielle?
I mean, it's luckily when somebody posts on Facebook, their name's attached to it. So you can do a little creeping if you want and click on somebody and say, all right, some people overshare. Some people don't carry any clout, so you can kind of just push that stuff to the side. There's so many people now that are affected by it that, we talked about, the people that are addicted or in recovery. but there's their families too, and so there's their families telling the stories. So I think that that kind of stuff definitely outweighs the negative stuff of people talking about everybody who's addicted is going to go rob a convenience store.
Right, right. And I know, Jay, you sit in the editing booth, and you're a great editor, and you come to a piece and you say, should I include that or not? It's kind of interesting because people will be fascinated. How do you make that decision?
Well, when I worked in television, there was more of a driving force to, if you were doing some kind of story, maybe dealing with addiction. I did a story on gay and lesbian parenting, in which to try to find gay couples who are raising children. And so you, in the editing room, as you're going through a 5-minute interview, you're going to select maybe 35, 55 seconds of the soundbite.
Right.
And do you take the part where they're crying because that's the stuff that's most compelling? Do you take the part where they're criticizing society or something like that? It's a fine line. Do you between telling their story and exploiting them in order to get ratings? I mean, that still exists in television and on any other kind of publishing thing. I tend to do videos for agencies. I'm telling an agency story.
Right.
So I have the luxury of someone is sold into the agency. That agency has helped their lives. So I'm not going to put anything that's going to exploit them. It's something that they feel comfortable telling. It's easy. You have much more of a challenge than I do because now you're representing the public. The public's right to know. Where is that fine line between, telling a good story and exploiting someone? I'm sure you run into that every day.
Yeah, and at least with Jay, he goes out of the editing booth, shows it to the executive director or the people and says, how does this look to you?
Yeah.
And you can
show it
change
to the people who we've interviewed.
That's right.
So that they feel good about it. So I have a feel-good experience all the way through.
So you sit
But you
behind the
don't.
word processor
Yeah.
and say, should I, shouldn't I? But once it's out there, it's out.
I was grappling with something like this yesterday. A case came across my desk with somebody that's prominent, not in this community, but in another community, who was dealing with addiction, and it's a debate as to whether you write something about it or don't. And ultimately, we decided against it. And I like to think that most respectable news outlets would do that, but sometimes there's no right answer. And if somebody figures out about it and posts on Facebook, your hand is forced sometimes.
Right.
So all the mediums, I think, go together. We depend so much on social media for information and putting our information out there that you can't separate those ecosystems.
Yeah.
And you talked about the video of the gay and lesbian couples parenting, but now with social media, you could share the whole interview. So
Right.
you like this story, make sure you go check out our Facebook page for the full interview. So you got that luxury now.
Well, this story was done, I want to say it was 1997,
Yeah, so that
98.
wouldn't have been
At the
possible.
time, the state was determining whether they were going to allow gay couples to take foster children. So there was a big brouhaha about that. So, fortunately, I was able to find some courageous people who could tell their story. And their story was no different than straight couples who were raising children. They had the same concerns: their education, their well-being, raising healthy kids, whether they will have friends at schools and stuff like that. It just happened to be that it was 2 women or 2 men, but the story was the same. And I think that's what really clicked for a lot of people, because we got some pretty good feedback about it. The fact, I didn't realize that gays and lesbians have the same issues that I have.
Now, see, for that kind of media, done well, I get an understanding of that. It's not sensationalized, but it's really, it can change my mind. So we talk about stigma. How can social media do that?
Well, I was just thinking that you said, people were thinking they're the same as I am. Well, now with people posting about their addiction problems or families posting about a loved one's addiction problem, it's easier for people to say, oh, I didn't realize that they were dealing with this too. Everybody's dealing with it. Everybody knows somebody that has had a problem with addiction.
That's right. And, you know, I
It's like a
love the
support group.
I love the piece Jay did for us, and it's with Frank Cavallo and Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, you get a shot of Tim and his family, and there is Tim in his pajama bottoms, and they're patting the dog, and Mama's got, you know, food on the table. You say, this is like my family. This looks a lot like
Absolutely.
my family.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But then Tim talked about the pain that he put his parents through. And so it was interesting the fact that he owned up to his problem. And Tim's problem was a case where he got into addiction quite by accident because of his DNA or his makeup or something. He got hooked where other people might have tried it and not got hooked. And I mean, that's what you're discovering more and more, is the fact that it's not necessarily your fault you're addicted to it. It's your chemical makeup that allows you to get addicted and other people don't. I fell off my bike and broke my arm. So I was on Oxy for a short period of time. And when I came home from the hospital, the arm was just throbbing. It was so painful. So I had so many Oxy on the first day, and I took a little bit less. I was off it after about 5 or 6 days. But there are kids who can't get off of it.
That's right.
They get a taste of it, it gets in their system, and they can't stop. So I think that's the story that needs to come out, and which is starting to come out now, is the fact that if you're addicted, it's not necessarily because you're a bad person or you're weak or you don't have the strength to be, you know, to overcome
kick
this.
it.
Yeah, it's a hook that gets into you, and you need help, you need support, and so it becomes a family's problem, and the family together fighting it, like Tim and his father Frank and his mother and his sister. Everyone came together to help him.
Also, the awareness now for families that they know if their child has a prescription
Right.
to monitor that so
Right.
that it doesn't
Right.
get out of
Right,
control.
right,
And these are confusing situations
Yeah,
for families,
yeah.
and difficult situations for families.
Right.
So in terms of your media areas, I'm out there, and I'm not a media person. I read about addiction in there, and I read the good and the bad and the ugly and the tantalizing. How do I separate out fact from fiction? What do I do? Because I don't know what the truth is anymore.
I mean, I think social media is different because everybody has a stake in it. So I feel like probably you both could speak better to that than I could.
Yeah, a personal strategy that I use, and this isn't just for addictions, for a lot of the controversial things
Right.
in the news these days, is never just stop at one source when you're reading something. You know, we all have a general sense of the big institutions that are reliable, have been around for a long time, but that doesn't mean that, you know, somebody new or somebody smaller doesn't have good information, compelling information. But just try and, you know, cross-check. You don't have to go on a big research mission. Just read a couple articles about something before you assume that
So
it's true.
can we say to people, don't believe anything until you check it out? Because all, you know, you read, if you're a Twitter person, and I do a little bit of Twitter. I kind of like the tweets and to read them. They're fast, but I get some information. I say, wow, if that's true, then I'm getting out of town. So what do? You check it. Where do you check it?
Also, like even on the Lowell Sun's Facebook page, when an article's posted, I can't believe some of the things that the comments that people make. It blows my mind. So I think it's important to educate the younger generation on like what not to do on social media and what to do. And
Well, and it's where it happens. If you're at home in your den and you type something in, it's different than if you're in the public square, like here, saying something. You know, on TV or in a public area, you're not going to be quite so bombastic. As sitting all by yourself behind the keyboard, you can say bombastic things and type it. Then you think
That's right. I mean,
No
but
one
it's attached to your picture, like in your profile. That's what I don't get. I always, when I would teach it,
but
would
people
say,
don't make the connection.
don't put anything on social media that you wouldn't feel comfortable with your
Right.
picture on the front page of the Lowell Sun. Like that's
Right.
what I would always say when I taught social
and
media.
you know, that's a good rule. I mean, you have an editor. The editor's going to look at that and say, come
Yeah.
on, Todd, you can't put that in here.
Right,
You know, we got a
right.
reputation. You've got me. And
Yeah.
you've got your clients that are
Yeah.
going to say, we can't go that way, Jay.
Right. Well, that's not
But-
the message we're trying to convey. Correct.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But for social media, you're pretty much out there.
Absolutely.
When you're out there.
Yeah.
And that's why I say every person has their own personal brand these days. Every person has a brand of their own, and
Mm-hmm.
you want to portray something that you feel good about not only in the present time, but 10 years, 20 years from now. 'Cause
Right.
Right.
Something can always come back to you.
Yeah, right.
Addiction and substance use disorder is the #1 killer of people under the age of 55 in this country. And yet, people will rarely talk about it. I mean, if I'm a diabetic and I'll say, hey, Todd, if I look a little hazy, tell me because I'm a diabetic. I would never tell you if I look a little hazy, tell me because I'm a drug addict. So how do we end that stigma? People are still ashamed of what they do. And some brave people, like the Cavallos and Wendy and Waylon and other people, will come out and say, I want to tell my story because it's important that people hear that. But how do we get beyond the stigma? How can media help end that stigma?
Talking about it. Social media is a really easy way easy. I say easy, it's not easy for the person going through it, but an effective, fast way that you can get your message out there.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think that in any media, the more we put it out there, it'll take time, but it helps. But social media in particular, especially for the younger generation that uses that more, makes it more okay to talk about. It educates the younger generation, so maybe they're not as likely to pick up a bottle of prescription pills. It's dangerous because people can say whatever they want about you very quickly, but if you can have a thick skin, I really do think that that's going to be the key.
Well,
The other thing too is the Hollywood. It's kind of a chicken and an egg.
oh yeah.
Hollywood has always conveyed the drug addict as the guy on the street, who is committing crimes or doing illicit things in order to get their fix. Hollywood is starting to portray stories of the family member who's addicted, who's trying to fight or recovery, people who are in recovery. That has become a source in Hollywood because people have come forward and spoke up about their recovery and stuff like that. So it's a chicken and egg thing, and the more you talk about it, the more people accept it, and then images, movies, and things like that start to play on that.
And of course, but there's always that fine line, isn't there,
Right.
Between making it attractive to people. I want to be a superhero. I got to take some drugs, and,
Right.
and making it attractive versus being a cautionary note to people,
Right.
which is so important. So now you're all commissioner of social media in the world. You control it, commissioner of all the print stuff, commissioner of films, whatever the title is. What would you do to improve the social media, the print media, the film media, to really be more responsive to people with, and I always say disabilities in general, but especially addiction, because it is such a shame for people to do. What would you do to make it more
I
effective?
would have a handbook of the rules to play nice in the sandbox so
Really?
that the negative stuff would stay out. And I think that there should be more education for parents of young kids. So I have 3 kids under 5 right now, and we've had conversations about it. I'm like, when do I start talking to my kids about this?
Yeah.
Because it's so prevalent now. And like, when do you start planting the seeds of
Well,
what could happen if you take a pill or...
You're right. It's so confusing to parents. It's so scary to parents because they hear about it. And one of the things we've done is we've told people, and they're convinced of this now, that it's everyone's problem. It's not just that's just the people living under the bridges in Lowell. So now parents are really terrified. They don't know what to do. So
There's
again,
a topic for your next show.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's actually been a good topic, and what we always tell people is, don't hesitate to go with your instincts, because your instincts are the best. If you think your child is using, they probably are. So
And
what
don't
about-
ignore it and hope that it goes away.
Right.
Exactly. And in some ways, look at the social media, because you go on Facebook pages, you listen, you look at the tweets, and you hear some of the things that other kids are saying. Like, boy, I got a hold of some good marijuana the other day, or whatever, and it's great, and it's got fentanyl in it, and it's, you begin to hear that stuff, and you say, wow, I've got to make my child a little more cautious about this. So what would you do with the print media?
Yeah, well, if I were commissioner of the print media, I'd probably be looking for another job.
You probably couldn't stand the stress, first of all.
Everybody always says in the newspaper that they want to see more positive stories. I think that's absolutely part of it. We need to write more stories about people in recovery. But you can't just do that. And this is probably a more radical approach than I think a lot of my colleagues and people more experienced than me in the industry would advocate for. But I oftentimes don't see the value in writing these kind of quick hit crime stories. It doesn't just have to be about addiction and drugs, but so and so was arrested for dealing this, or so and so was arrested and they were high on this. It doesn't add a lot to the community, in my opinion, and it shames people and it creates a stigma.
Unfortunately, it sells, though. It's like,
It does
the accident on the side of the road, everybody stops to see.
That's right.
And so that's...
and that's why we still do it.
right. And in TV, it used to be the thing, if it bleeds, it leads. So that's human nature. I don't know how you get away from it. But you need, you need some balance to that. You're right.
Well, it's like on TV news. What is the fascination with fires?
Yeah.
Every night there's at least 2 or 3 fires. It's even if it's a little campfire somewhere,
Yeah,
they leave
right.
with it. A little fire happened.
Right.
So and it's a problem. So you're right. I think it's that balance that makes that particularly difficult. So as we're kind of running out of time and winding down here, what kinds of things would you like to say about what your ideal story would be? What would you, if you could take social media and say, I don't want to do one thing on it, what would it be, Danielle?
I think I'm going back to the family piece. I like the story about the Cavallos and just, a story about a family coming together and showing all the facets of it, and the son knowing that he's put his parents through pain, and the parents supporting the son. So just those positive stories of support.
Yet there are still pieces out there, and one piece that actually made the rounds on film, as a matter of fact, Jay, and it was sponsored and funded by some pretty famous people, that basically showed kids at a party, and they were grabbing drugs and eating them, and we showed it at the high school here. And ultimately, one of the kids died, and they all had to mourn. And it was kind of one of the, if you remember, Scared Straight. But, kids out there saying, I see that, but that would never happen to me. I just used it occasionally. And,
Right.
So that's a hard part about getting to that. So Todd, what do you think? What's your ideal?
Yeah. Well, when I can figure out how to do this, I'll try and do it. But what I would really love to be able to do is write a story that explains how addiction really works and kind of the science behind it in a way that's not a research paper, because I think that's so integral to understanding why people do some of the things that they do and why they're not criminals. They're people with a medical condition. But you have to put a personal touch on it, and otherwise nobody will read it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I love the David versus Goliath story, the person who has everything stacked up against him or her and still manages to succeed. And that applies to addiction, that applies to politics, that applies to business. That's kind of like the American way. I'm watching this series called The Frontiers about people exploring the West. And people took the courage to go out into areas that they weren't comfortable with, or there wasn't safety, but they had a dream and they wanted to live a better life. And so those David versus Goliath stories are the ones that I really love. So.
And of course, the old problem is you can't have censorship and have a free press
Right.
at the same time, which is true on social media, which is true in print media and film. So it's one of the liabilities, but you can do tremendous things and be very powerful with the kinds of things you do. So this has been a great conversation. I love having it, and thank you. And this is a fun group. In
Thanks
fact,
for
we were
having me.
talking before, and we could still be talking for the next 4 hours. So thank you all for joining us. And I want to tell you about one thing. On April 5th, we have our Living in the Light, our fourth gala, and we are honoring a great person. Judge Tom Brennan, who's just retired. He founded the Drug Court. In fact, Todd and I are going very shortly to interview Judge Brennan. He's got a fascinating background. He's a powerful guy. And this is where we can begin to use the media to give the positive things about doing what you're doing and how people solve these problems. So we want to thank you all for joining us. Any other information you need, please go to www.lowellhouseinc.org. Don't forget the Inc.org. And as you know, and we always say, recovery does matter. Thank you all very much.